Hey everybody, welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's Rick here, and today I have Randy Kern, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Marqeta. And before joining Marqeta, Randy was the Executive Vice President, Chief Customer Technology Officer at Salesforce, and a Partner Director of Development at Microsoft. Marqeta provides developers advanced infrastructure and tools for building highly configurable payment cards. So with its open APIs, the Marqeta platform is designed for businesses who want to easily build tailored payment solutions to create best-in-class experiences and power new modes of money movement. So you might have heard of them in some of the favorite fintech apps. So is that right, Randy?
Absolutely. We power a bunch of folks that you probably have in your wallet and in your phone today. If you use Cash App or if you've ever done any on-demand delivery during the pandemic, you've probably taken advantage of the Marqeta ecosystem.
And so I want to start there if we could, right? So when you deal with something like money and financial payments and those kind of rails, so to speak, those are pretty kind of serious things that people need to rely on, right? So, what can you walk us through that technical challenge that you have to deal with?
Yeah, no, the challenges are fun, right? Because it's about scale, it's about availability, it's about trust, it's about security. It's really about making sure that that payment vehicle, that someone's life can actually progress as planned. You kind of think about a payment card. It's an old piece of technology. Credit cards came out in the 50s. Back then, they were based on carbon copies and typewriters. We've obviously come a long, long way in the intervening decades, but it has to work all the time, right? Whether you're buying gas for the weekend, whether you're buying groceries for your family, or you're using it as part of your job in a commercial context, I mean, you really need a payment card to work every single time you try. In the kind of consumer web space, we have to talk about 3 nines or 4 nines. In the payment cards industry, that would just be a basic starting point, right? That would never be the finish line. So you're really looking for not only the obviously availability of that, so that someone can use their card, can process that transaction, can buy those goods or make that payment at any point, but you also need a high degree of accuracy, right? These is moving people's money around. There's the act of authorizing the transaction and then clearing kind of behind the scenes where settlement and money movement happens. But these things need to be accurate. Even tiny, tiny, tiny errors obviously have huge impact on folks' lives and businesses' kind of outcomes too. So it's a really interesting space, and the technical challenges really for us as the leader in the modern card issuing and processing space, it's about marrying high degrees of accuracy, high degrees of performance, high degrees of availability, high degrees of scale with a very flexible, very modern, very API and developer first platform, something that frankly is hard to do.
I think I want to start there, right? So when I speak with developers, we often talk about the technical challenges involved, right? So when you look, it's kind of first off the top of your head, scale is one aspect. Second is that the technical challenge in terms of like the problems that you're actually solving. And it seems like at Marqeta, there's both, right? Like, what is your pitch to engineers who are interviewing with you? How do you get them to join the team and kind of like be willing to kind of tackle that problem?
Well, one of the things that I personally really enjoy about it is the work that we do every day actually matters to people. And I'm not saying that the vast majority of things in tech and in the broader industry matter. People love the products they use. They love the systems that you take advantage of. But being in the payment space and being a card issuer and processor like we are does feel a little bit different because you're literally in people's kind of daily lives. They've got their cell phone in their pocket. They've also got a payment card. Maybe it's in the phone, maybe it's a separate card, but you're sort of that tech that powers, the cup of coffee you go to buy, right? It's there day in and day out. And at least for me personally, I really like having impact in my work. And actually, it's kind of interesting. Early in my career, within Microsoft, I was at Microsoft for almost 25 years, and I obviously took several different roles throughout the company. early on, I sort of picked them purely on technical challenge. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a really meaty problem. I'll learn all these things. It'll be fantastic. And it was, and I really enjoyed that. But it didn't take me too long to realize that if I was working somewhere where there was a meaningful impact, like so a sort of great job mattered more than a good job, which mattered a lot more than a poor job. So it was worthwhile. There was the impact behind it. It mattered to the world, to my colleagues, to the company, to consumers, kind of the whole ecosystem. And if I was working with great people, there were technical challenges. There were guaranteed to be technical challenges. There were guaranteed to be things to learn. So for me personally, kind of making sure that there's that impact and making sure that I have folks around me to learn from and kind of enjoy this journey and enjoy the work together with, that became kind of the higher order bit. And what I was sort of enthused or happy to discover after a few years was that the technical depth goes hand in hand with that. It's sort of automatically there. Whether it's figuring out how to make transaction processing. One of the interesting things about the way Marqeta works. So a transaction comes into us from the payment card rails. Picture Visa, MasterCard, something like that. So someone swipes their card. What's called a merchant acquirer is invoked first for the point of sale. They put that transaction, that authorization request onto that payment rail. So it's basically a network managed by Visa or MasterCard, whoever is the card network behind that particular payment vehicle. Then that comes to us. And since we're the processor of that card, we need to make a determination about whether to approve or deny that transaction. Now, one of the things that's really unique about Marqeta is we make a real-time API call to our customer on behalf of that card. So now it's not even just kind of these 3 or 4 organizations as part of that transaction and as part of this kind of performance and resilience dependent transaction, but we're actually calling it out to our customers as well using modern open APIs, waiting for their response, dealing with any uptime or challenges our customers may have, and still making sure that we get back to the network in time such that when you're standing there waiting to pump your gas, your card gets approved in plenty of time and you get on with your day. And so there's the depth as well as the breadth of technical challenges on top of something that you can tell your friends about and you can explain and sort of matters in people's daily life. Here in the US, at least, it's amazing how many people use Cash App. So nearly everyone, whether they know about us directly or not, has been impacted by Marqeta. And I just kind of love that marriage of actual human impact, something that matters out there in the world that makes people's lives better on a kind of real daily basis, and the technical challenges where you can dig really deep, you can do interesting work, you can help to modernize an entire industry. As I said, credit cards came out in the 50s and it was really typewriters and carbon copies, right? So we've already come so far, but there's still so much to do in this space around kind of integrating the experience, making it more embedded, more interactive, more flexible, and frankly, making it a lot easier for companies to innovate on top of this really powerful piece of technology, a payment card.
Well, I can see you certainly love and have a passion for what you do. It's amazing. Do you stay when you're in Starbucks and people are buying things? Do you kind of go, "It's me. I'm making this happen." See what you're doing there, buying that coffee? I'm behind it. I'm the guy. I'm the guy that makes it work. Because that's right. That's really what it boils down to. You're one of the people behind to make that happen. And it's so interesting you mentioned, Randy, I haven't thought of this in years. I remember as a kid when I would go with my family to like a department store and you got a credit card, you had that swipe thing and you had like, I don't know what you would call it, the carbon copy kind of stuff, right? I haven't thought of it until
Yeah,
you brought it up. Oh
you
my
you
God.
you'd sign that little chit and the machine with the little roller to imprint the card numbers. Yeah, it was and now half my cards don't have card numbers anymore. Like if I found one of those machines in the world, my card wouldn't even work.
Well, what's the next iteration? So are you kind of looking, and Marqeta looking to say, okay, where do we go past the cards? Is that a thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and even looking just at the innovation around the world. I mean, in some parts of the world, people are putting QR codes on cards, and that's a whole nother kind of quick way to make payments. There's so much innovation in this space, whether it's things that we're driving, One of the things that I really, really enjoy about the space is our customers drive a huge amount of innovation. So in partner with Marqeta, we'll sit down and brainstorm kind of what someone wants to do in the area, why they're interested in a payment card, how they're going to use it. Is it a consumer card? Is it more of a commercial experience as part of the rest of their business and the rest of their ecosystem? And really brainstorm how innovation in this whole space can help drive their industry and help modernize their industry. And in the end, produce whole experiences that couldn't exist before. So, it's hard to say exactly where this stuff will take us, but you look at crypto, you look at QR code payments, you look at peer-to-peer, you look at, even the advances in time and accuracy and everything and reach, frankly, in existing debit and credit cards. It wasn't long ago that when I would travel internationally, my card wouldn't work. Before I'd go on a trip, I'd have to go get cash in the local currency. My credit card, I don't remember the last time I had a problem traveling internationally with my card, the same card I carry here in the US to buy coffee. So, even in relatively non-obvious ways, there's been tremendous innovation. And I think as we bring more and more of kind of the technology world to the financial sector and to especially to consumer finance and embedded finance, something like on-demand delivery, companies of that nature, where it's so integral to their entire business model. I think the sky is really the limit in terms of what people will dream up, what people will try, and we'll see what really takes off and what resonates with both consumers and other businesses. So I love situations where you're sort of in the nexus of that. I worked in Azure for a long time, and I loved working with customers who are trying to think about how to modernize their own technology stacks and their own systems. I did a lot of the same work when I was at Salesforce. So seeing how people take your products, take your platforms, and innovate and drive things in ways that maybe initially you never even thought about. But then when you're sitting there working together, you've got a whiteboard, hopefully in the room with you, you really, really can take this stuff in amazing places. And it's just fun, right? Because you're constantly sort of building really, as an engineer at Marqeta or in this space, really anywhere, you're simultaneously building really grounded, really foundational things. It's got to scale even more. It has to be even more secure, even more accurate, even more available, right? Things that just are sort of hardcore engineering problems. And you sit down and you think about, okay, how do I get the next order of magnitude in terms of availability? And then how do I get the next order of magnitude in terms of sort of dynamic interaction? And how do I manage all these different constituents and kind of partners in that transaction flow, yet still provide a really, really high quality experience? These are kind of hardcore nitty-gritty engineering problems. Yet we're in this environment and in this sort of business context and world context where there's massive evolution and massive change. For the longest time, these kind of systems were very static. A lot of them ran on mainframes, and that sort of lack of innovation or lack of move is really how you got to the scale and you got to the availability, you got to the accuracy. It's amazing. If you never touch something, it works surprisingly well. But if you also want to have innovation and you also want to have progress and you also want to kind of bring new ideas to light and new products and new value, then you have to find this really tricky balance where you're doing both things at once. And, those are they're inherently fun problems to work on. They take great people working together, being very collaborative and very creative, and it's really stimulating.
I want to kind of tap a little deeper there. Like, why do you think that the finance industry has been so late to change, right? When you think about banking or kind of the consumer applications of finance that people are familiar with, you've mentioned the credit card. You mentioned before that it was carbon printing and just like very basic things, right? On the banking side, like what is financial technology? Is it the ATM? When was that created? Maybe consumer banking apps on your phone. That there's quite a gap between ATMs and the mobile apps that we all use today. Why is there such a such a long delay?
I think it gets even more interesting if you expand and you think about this globally. So, I think back to uh, my childhood growing up with my family here in the US. We would take like one Saturday a month and we'd drive around town and we'd pay all our bills. So my dad would go into the newspaper and he'd write a check, and he'd go to the power company and he'd write a check, and he'd sort of go around town, and I'd, tot along with him, and we'd spend, I don't know, it felt like forever as a little kid, but it was probably a half an hour drive around town and paying our bills. And, it was a physical checkbook. You wrote the check by hand with a pen that the cashier gave you, and you kind of moved on to the next one. And, today, my bill experience modulo, so there's some really fascinating stuff happening in fintech and bill pay, where there's Truebill. I mean, there's a ton of companies in this space doing really, really innovative stuff. But if I look kind of broadly in terms of how a lot of us do this today, it's not that different. I mean, yes, in a lot of cases, I can get auto pay, thankfully. So either I set it up with my bank so they take care of it, or the vendor themselves has a way to kind of do an ACH automatically. So it's gotten easier, but it's still this sort of very distributed process, right? And unless I am using one of those kind of innovators in the space, I have to go to a bunch of different places to set it up. If I want to check and make sure everything is still working and I'm not inadvertently failing to pay a bill, maybe it's in my email, but there's so many different websites I have to go to and figure out the login and everything else. But what's fascinating to me is the innovation that's happening there globally and in the US with some of these fintechs I'm talking about. But there's also other places in the world where, we didn't really have a check-based bill pay system. It was much more cash, and it kind of leapfrogged all the way to a cell phone, all the way to mobile. And it went almost directly from cash to this sort of central mobile experience. And I've got friends who effectively pay every bill they have, whether it's their rent or their water or anything else, through WeChat. And the whole idea of kind of being able to do that in such a centralized way, of kind of having such a modern experience, it's fascinating, because there has been a ton of innovation, and there's a lot of innovation in the US as well. But kind of country by country, I feel that everyone goes in slightly different spurts based on where they are at any point in time, and kind of the opportunity ahead of them, and the friction someone feels as well. So, I guess on one hand, it feels like there's not a lot of innovation. On the other, it's amazing, right? We've come so far, whether it's the technology behind some of these things, the security and accuracy of these transactions and of our money. And frankly, even as consumers, the things we can do, whether it's, Cash App, whether it's Zelle, all of this is so fundamentally different than it was even 10 years ago. And so it's interesting to see the pace of innovation change, and also the focus. I mean, so much of it now, I've got my phone sitting on my desk, right? So much of it now is sort of centered around this, as opposed to my physical checkbook.
If you had
Got it.
if you had to kind of dream up that next iteration, even if it can't happen in the near term, what would you think? How would this change from a credit card and everything you mentioned now to really just taking it to the next level?
One of the things that's really powerful about credit cards or debit cards is reach. The networks and banks have worked so hard to make them work nearly everywhere, right? Merchant acquirers have helped vendors and merchants and retailers accept many different cards in many different places. So it has amazing reach, and it's relatively quick, right? It's a relatively quick form of payment, as opposed to something like a check or cash or something that has a more physical presence. Those are great tenets, and I think whatever comes next needs to be just as good in those regards. You need to be able to use it anywhere, and obviously this isn't you don't go 0 to infinity in one step, right? You're going to take some steps out, but for something to really supplant, or not even supplant, but really sort of be on that same level of impact to the world, I think it needs the same kind of reach. It needs to be very fast. It needs to be very secure. And it needs to be fast, not just in terms of actually moving the money around. That's obviously a very important part of it, but it needs to be very quick in terms of giving the card holder or the account holder insight and feedback, right? So you have a really quick understanding of where your money is going, where it's coming from, and kind of helping to connect all of this. A lot of us, we're kind of wait and see our statement to figure out both what we spent and, make sure that our income was as we expected and everything else. These are sort of slow cycles relative to how important it is in our life. And I think we've seen across almost every sector of daily living, this sort of reduction in the increment, right? The cycle time comes down, right? The amount of time it takes to understand what's happened, to understand what I've done, understand what may have happened around me. That has become just so much more, if not instantaneous, very near real time. And that's one of the amazing things that people can do with a Marqeta card, right? You can kind of get a toast in your app, or you can get feedback, on your phone much more quickly about what's going on and how you're using things. So, I'm it's hard to say exactly what will gain traction and really take off. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff in the space. There's lots of great peer-to-peer networks. There's lots of excitement and use around crypto and other things. Exactly what the future holds, I'm not sure, but it needs to have some of these same characteristics that make payment cards so incredibly powerful. And frankly, people they were invented in the 50s, but they're still an incredibly useful piece of technology. It's probably the most useful piece of technology that I have. When I step out from the house, I'd put that ahead of my phone in terms of its importance.
It is amazing because, like, if you go somewhere, even if you travel, all right, if I have my credit card and on my phone, I'm pretty good, because it used to be, like you said, when you went around with your dad and your family, when you go on vacation, you have to make sure you have everything. Now, like, no, I got my credit card, the phone, and it doesn't matter where I'm in Seoul or I'm in New Jersey or I'm in Seattle or Oakland, doesn't, I'm good. It's wild. Randy, I was thinking, like, when I asked the question about moving forward, but do you also look as important, or maybe sometimes more important, about like cyber attacks, about fraud? Because I get at least once a quarter from American Express saying, Jack, someone is using this to take a trip to India, or and I'm not exaggerating, like almost every quarter, my business card, there's always something going wrong. And is that a big thing that Marqeta and people, and yourself kind of are concerned about, to make sure that,
the whole industry obviously spends a
yeah,
lot of time working on both cybersecurity as well as fraud and other risk reduction. One of the things that's really interesting to me about this whole industry and kind of for Marqeta in particular is the data that we have, right? And seeing this transaction flows, using sort of more modern machine learning techniques and other data analytics techniques in order to spot fraud and to catch it and prevent it. It's fascinating. It's very powerful. And in fact, the sort of traditional way of doing it is exactly what you described with Amex, saying, oh, it's a little late now. Your card details obviously got out. Someone used it to book a trip that doesn't look like it was you. We'll cancel that card. We'll issue you a new card number. Like the whole thing just starts over. It's security through obscurity. And we all know that doesn't really work. What's kind of cool about the advancements in the card network technology behind the scenes, things like tokenization, virtual cards, stuff that Marqeta does for a lot of big customers today, though it's no longer security through obscurity, right? In a lot of cases, it's security through actual cryptography. It's security through being able to have one-time use numbers. There's a lot of kind of underlying technical changes that we couldn't really do with a traditional physical card with your numbers printed in raised type.
Mhm.
That in a more modern, more digital, more sort of tech-first card, even though everything around it is still exactly the same, you can inherently make that thing a lot more secure. And so I think there's fascinating stuff to do here, both in that traditional case of, oh, this transaction looks fraudulent, or we're not sure about this. Why don't we ask the cardholder real time on their phone if they're actually doing this or not? But all of those techniques were about kind of putting the thing back in the bag, right? It's your number's out somehow. It escapes somehow, somewhere. One of those carbon copies we were talking about flew off in the wind and someone picked it up. So I think what's really powerful here, though, is when technology can actually just close the door on some of those traditional attack vectors and kind of traditional sources of fraud. It's not going to go to zero, obviously, because you still need that traditional approach in a lot of situations. But it's really interesting because you can really use technology on both sides. You can use it to detect fraud and then do the kind of traditional, okay, time for a new card number. But you can also do this sort of more modern approach where that's much more cryptographically secure. The kind of handshake between various things is much more secure, and that identity that it says, this is my account, yes, this is my payment card, and I'm making this transaction, that can remain much more tightly held than it ever could before. So it's a really fun space. Once again, regardless of your sort of domain of interest in engineering, maybe you're really into machine learning, maybe you're really into cryptography and security, maybe you're really into large scale distributed systems and high availability and kind of 24/7 innovation and growth. There's fascinating work to do and challenging work to do really across the gambit.
I mean, speaking of specialties, right? So often I almost call it a trap. Technologists and job seekers, they kind of get down to this level where they feel like they need to specialize in a certain discipline or in a certain industries. We often hear of job seekers that have target industries like, I really want to work in fintech, or I want to work in crypto or consumer apps. Do you think this kind of rush to specialize is the right approach for a technologist?
It's an interesting question, and I, for me personally, I would say no.
Okay.
I would say that um, if you're first off, I think you have to really ask yourself what you like about this industry and what's driving you, right? Really get a good understanding, and if it's if you're thinking about sort of where you want to take your career or what industry to work in, or even, do you want to be in a tech company? Do you want to be in the tech department of a non-tech company? All of this, like, it's interesting to think about, but I would start from really understanding what you want to get good at. So I have a basic belief, I guess you could say, that mastery and being really good at something is inherently rewarding, right? You feel good inside when you do that. You winds up sort of creating passion. Like, getting good at something makes you excited to do it and to do it better and better and better, kind of almost whatever it is. And so, I think for a lot of us, you really do need to go super deep, right? So I'm not saying stay really broad and be a huge generalist. Like, whatever area you're sort of in, get really deep and really understand how that system is working. And it's this interesting balance of being able to go as close to the transistors and understanding what the actual transistors are doing as you can, while also learning how to put the context of the overall problem in your head at once. but I would really encourage people to never shy away from going really, really deep and really understanding for whatever it is they're working on. Maybe you're working on a file system, maybe you're working on credit card processing, maybe you're working on a website, whatever it happens to be, but try to not get try to avoid having sort of a floor in your knowledge based on the abstractions around you. You know, I have an advantage. I started in this industry with a soldering iron and you know, transistors and diodes, and you know, I sort of worked my way up, and so the abstractions that we had back then were not nearly as powerful or complex as they are. You know, the whole systems weren't nearly as powerful or as complex as they were. So you almost had to do that. But I found it over time that folks who, you know, maybe you're working in a garbage collected language, maybe you're working in Go or C# or Java or whatever it happens to be, but getting a little bit deeper. Hey, sorry, thank you, Foss. Getting a little bit deeper to the point where you understand what that memory manager is actually doing, and how it's helping you, and also how it may be, you know, getting in the way, it may be hurting you. I think that's really important. And getting to the point where, you know, you really understand as deep as you possibly can, it makes things real in a way that otherwise they never will be. And it increases the quality of your designs, it increases the quality of your software. And I think is an incredibly important step that a lot of people, if they're kind of think about, you know, if they kind of pivot on what industry do I want to be in, or what kind of job do I want, or if you kind of start there, I find a lot of folks never build the depth, and they never get to the point where they really understand it. And part of why that's so important, you know, I talked about having the overall picture in your head at the same time, right? So programming is this weird balancing act where you need this kind of whole picture. So you're thinking about, you know, I'm making a change here, what are the implications everywhere else, while being able to really keep the details of the thing that you're working on at the moment really in mind and really deeply understood. And, you know, that's inherently hard. It's also inherently fun, I think, but it's inherently hard. And if you don't get to the point where the depth, the details are sort of easily in grasp, now everything in that bigger picture starts to get fuzzy, and the implications across it start to get fuzzy. And it's much harder to really reason about it and really be kind of certain and concrete in the implications of any decision or change you might make. So, you know, my suggestion would be to worry a little less about the job or the industry or frankly, anything like that. Pick a spot where there's impact, because that I guarantee you there'll be interesting problems, worthwhile problems, things you can learn from there, or at least I've always found that to be true. And pick a place where there's people you can learn from, because this is a hard, complicated industry, and figuring it all out for yourself has gotten to the point where that's just an almost insurmountable thing. And having people to learn from, having people to bounce ideas off of, having people to teach, frankly, kind of that whole cycle, I think helps tremendously in terms of really getting to the point of mastery.
I love that advice, Randy. And what's so interesting is I think it crosses over to all different sectors. It's not necessarily unique to technology or engineers, you know, whatever profession you're in. And this kind of harkens back to this trend of the quiet quitting trend, where you can't escape it. You know, that, you know, every article Rick could appreciate, because he's a writer, he's a journalist, is that now there's every iteration of quiet quitting. But the undercurrent, in part, it seems people have the job and they're just coasting, and they're not digging deep. They don't care enough to dig deep, which to me indicates they're probably in the wrong line of work. Because if you're going in every day or working remotely every day, and you don't have that innate curiosity about, you know, your profession or your job or what you're doing, I can understand in a way why you're quite quick, because you don't have any passion for it. You have no interest in it. And rather than, in my opinion, rather than just coasting, you might have some introspection and say, why am I not interested in this? What don't I like about it? And then take a step back and say, what do I want? make me get out of bed in the morning and get me excited about it and learn as much as I can about this area, and then go for that. And what's frustrating for me sometimes, when the media puts out these things, quiet quitting, they don't dig deep enough to say, wait, let's look, this is systemic of an issue, that people have these jobs and they're not connected to it. They're disengaged. They're not happy. They're frustrated. It's not good. It's not healthy for them, actually. And it's not good for the company. And we should kind of find a way to say, all right, if you're not engaged, let's either try to get you engaged somehow, or if you can't engage, let's rethink. Maybe let's say that in your company, there might be someone who's not, maybe they're in that wrong job. And if you have a conversation with your manager in HR, they say, hey, you know what, your skills might be better suited for this. Let's talk about it. And I think that would be a big change, because too often there's just so many people who do their jobs and they hate it and they're miserable, and they commute to work and they hate to commute, and I feel bad for that. And I know this firsthand, because I've been running a search firm for 25 years, and you hear these stories, and I'll say, why are you making yourself so miserable? Let's try something else. But then, not to go off on a tangent, you get those golden handcuffs. So now you're an attorney, you're a partner at a law firm, and you hate your job, you hate what you do, but you're making a very nice living. Your parents are proud of you, your family's proud of you, but you're miserable, and you're not doing. So the kind of advice you give, I think, is really helpful for people to hear, to really find that passion, find your interest, dig deep, do something that's impactful and meaningful. And I think that'll make all the difference, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, a stockbroker, a technician, doesn't matter, right? What do you think, Rick? Because you speak to, you see this all the time on your platform. What's your take?
Well, that's the thing, right? So I'm glad, Randy, you mentioned this need, or this advice to go deep into something, because on Blind, we have a lot of folks that are, you know, very mobile in their job, right? Like the Great Resignation seems to be a kind of like recent media meme, so to speak. But folks on Blind have been doing this for many, many years, right? Folks in the tech industry, where the average tenure at a company might just be, a year and a half, 2 years maybe, before you move on to something else. And I want to dig there, right? There's sure there are some people out there that in 18 months and 24 months they can accomplish a great deal. That is kind of the wonder of the technology industry. But I mean, do you have any advice there in terms of, hey, maybe it's slowed down, and how do you actually develop that kind of second order, or like depth, that you're recommending, right?
Yeah, I feel it takes time, right? And I'll share a parallel scenario here that comes up a lot, and then kind of focus on this one, because I think it's a microcosm of what we're describing here. I'll have folks come to me and have for decades saying, I want to be a manager. They're an IC engineer, they're really strong, they're up and coming, and they're like, I want to manage people. And I'm like, great, that's wonderful. Why? And we have a conversation about it. And my advice for most folks is to wait, right? Is to not worry about adding all of that extra complexity and all of those extra responsibilities and all of those extra challenges until the core job of building really great software is easy. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating. It never gets easy, because the complexity always goes up. The expectations always go up. It's one of the fun things about our industry. We're constantly reinventing it. We're constantly driving innovation. But until the sort of mechanics of writing really good software is second nature, and your sort of pace of growth and pace of change is slowed drastically, please don't worry about managing people. It's a whole nother area to go figure out and deal with and learn, right? There's a lot of complexity there, and a lot of challenge, and a lot of reward as well. I don't want to take away from it in the slightest, but I've had this conversation with people, at Microsoft, at Salesforce, here at Marqeta, over and over and over again throughout my career. And my strong advice is, to get way farther in your career in terms of your IC skills and depending on where you are, your kind of career ladder and things, than you ever thought you should. Because it's the observation I made is folks who move into management too early never quite get to the same point in their career. They sort of, usually, this is obviously there's no 100% rule here anywhere, but generally they plateau much earlier than folks who really kind of ride those core skills, really go deep, and take that very far into their engineering, their IC engineering career, before they worry about taking on people management on top. And those are the people who become executives, become just sort of the sky's the limit in that case. And I think that's very similar to this sort of short tenure, hunting for the new thing, jumping around for, maybe it's comp, maybe it's, I don't like the industry, who knows, right? There's a million things that you hear about, but at the end of the day, for me, I'm driven by curiosity. I'm driven by a desire for mastery. I'm driven by a desire to learn and to improve. And that takes a while. I don't care how smart you are, to your point, Rick, you can have an impact in 18 months, but can the environment have as big an impact on you as it could? I'm not sure it can. I think that sort of, internal growth, that internal learning, to really learn the lessons from an organization, from a business, from a code base, right? We're all engineers here. So the code base has lots of lessons to be learned. That's going to take a while, right? And why would you run away from the lessons to be had right there in front of you and put a bunch of energy into hunting for something else and kind of starting over with all the environment around what you're really trying to do? So, I don't know, for me at least, and my advice when people ask is, unless there's a really strong reason that you don't feel that you can succeed where you are, dig in a little bit, understand the system a little bit better, build a better support network in your environment. Jack, you talked about quiet quitting. I think part of it is people feel disconnected.
Yes.
And so then they disconnect even more, and the whole thing kind of compounds, right? And ask for help.
Yeah.
It's a weird bit of human behavior, but you ask someone for help, generally they appreciate it, right? And they reach out, and you build this wonderful connection. It was a little easier to do when we were sitting side by side in an office somewhere, but you can do it over Zoom, you can do it over Slack, you can do it over Teams.
It's so interesting you said that, because I think if you reach for help, I think most people want to help. They like to help. And sometimes the biggest problem is they'll stop. They won't stop. They'll keep giving you advice. It's just the opposite. Like, oh, sure, let me take you under my wing. I'll talk about this, and here's this. So you're right. They don't, they don't reach out. And I wonder if that's a failing just in companies for not having the managers kind of suggest that to people. Hey, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling left out, if you're feeling disengaged, my door's open. Come in, let's talk. And to go back to your management question, when people will come to you, Randy, I wonder if that's just a societal thing, that when you're a young person, I don't think it's as much as it used to be, but it would be, hey, you want to be a manager, you want to manage one person, 2 people, 10 people, that makes you a big shot, that makes you important. Whereas a lot of times people don't have the skill sets. You could be a great software engineer, but you might not have the interpersonal social skills, motivational skills, to be a manager. You're better off doing what you're doing. And you could probably be more successful as an individual. You would know this better than I, but I think you might be a better individual contributor in your career, could probably even make more money than being a mediocre manager just to say I'm a manager. Is that, Rick, do you see that? Do you kind of pop into that? Because you look at these people, say they shouldn't. It's like in sports, where you have a great baseball player, it's fantastic, and they're ready to retire, and then they become a manager, and they're terrible. They're a great player, but they don't know how to motivate people. They don't know how to encourage people. They're not empathetic. They're not compassionate. So it just becomes very, very tough for everyone involved.
I mean, I think what makes it very difficult is part of the allure of joining a larger technology company or a larger organization is they tend to have this infrastructure in place for almost everything, right? In terms of the code that you're shipping, the day-to-day responsibilities. But also, if you look on kind of the people management side, right? They have these very complex job ladders with codes assigned to everything, right? And so, you're a senior software engineer, and at Microsoft, that means you're a level like 63, right? And that at Google or Facebook or Amazon is L3, E4, L5, like all these things. And when you look at all those codes and you start to identify with that group and you say, well, I'm only 5 and the scale goes up to, let's say, L10, right? Um, but for many engineers, senior engineer seems to be that terminal level for them. They want to be ambitious and they want to get to principal, staff, or partner even. Do you have any advice, Randy, for someone besides the depth that we already talked about, the time needed to learn the technical challenges in the code base? Are there any other like tactical tips for kind of those like people that want to level up?
I think my biggest tip would be stay focused. Yeah, so often I see when people are trying to break through whatever their plateau is, they start looking more broadly, right? They start thinking, well, what else can I do? What can I do to stand out? What can I blah 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 blah? Is there some cross team initiative I can drive or whatever? And maybe in some environments that's important. I don't want to completely take away from that, but I think just like moving into management early in your career, it takes calories, it takes energy, and it takes time away from your core job, right? And the core, your mastery of that core job. And to Rick, as you were talking about all the career ladders and the numbers and everything, I was almost in my head, I was hearing this sort of story of gamification, and there's all this stuff around it, but at its core, the next level basically means you do a better version of what you did before. It's not like you're going out and doing a completely different thing, right? It's you can work on bigger problems, you can help more people. It's all the same stuff, but it's kind of turned up another click, right? And there's this whole psychology around it. And I think a lot of times folks go, oh, for whatever reason, I've been stuck here for a while. What do I do? And they start kind of trying a whole bunch of stuff. And at least for me, it still comes back to mastery and kind of the core skills, right? How do you get better at what you're doing? How do you get better at the job at hand? Um, the only nuance I would add here is perception matters. And don't go spend a bunch of time managing your image. I think that's a waste. But if you're getting feedback from people and you're like, but that's not what I actually do, that's not what I mean, that's not what I intend, listen anyway, because it's especially for something like this where there's talent review and there's a whole organization that sort of needs to celebrate someone when they make those really senior promotions, senior levels. The perception does matter, and so thinking about sort of being willing to say, well, maybe it's not my absolute or abstract truth, but it's clearly the truth for others, right? The perception is reality in terms of how people are observing the way I show up every day. Take it seriously. So if you're hearing feedback about, A, B, or C is kind of holding you back, uh, even if it doesn't kind of sit right with you, maybe think about a way to do an experiment, right? Say, okay, well, I don't quite believe this, but I keep hearing it. So I'm going to take 6 weeks and just, try a different thing, right? Whatever it happens to be, and see if that changes any of those interactions for you. But I would definitely put this, as a secondary aspect, and as kind of the special case when you're when you're being told but not hearing something, or if it doesn't quite sit with you. But job one in my mind to break through is just focus on mastery, focus on your understanding, focus on the job at hand, write better code. It's that's the core mission ahead of all of us.
Got it. I appreciate that advice. I think one other thing that I often hear about is, at the more senior levels, you it's about demonstrating impact, right? And oftentimes, you know, engineers, when you're going through that performance review process, you kind of roll your eyes when you hear that term or you hear that phrase, right? And you're thinking like, well, I'm shipping great code, right? Like, think about all of these things that I put into production. You're almost like raising your hands and saying like, hello, don't you see it? And so I want to kind of like dive deeper if we can there, like how does a senior level engineer kind of demonstrate that impact or set strategy or help kind of influence the roadmap, especially at a larger company where like are you really at Facebook or Meta rather going to be able to kind of set a roadmap for an established app that has billions of people using it?
Well, I mean, at that scale, it kind of comes down to how many people are actually involved, right? And if you've got a
Right.
team of 1,000 people working on it, I would argue that everyone should be setting the roadmap, but in sort of a turtles all the way down manner. Um,
Right.
when you think about impact, I think understanding why you're doing something is really important for so many levels, right? It's not just to kind of have those career conversations and level set on the impact of one's work. I think it's equally important so you make better decisions each and every day, and you feel more engaged and more excited to do the work as well. So really understanding not just what we're building and then go kind of figuring out the best way how, but understanding why, right? What is the actual human impact or business impact or security impact, whatever sort of aspect it is, there's some reason that the work is being done. It's not just to write some more cool code, although many of us do that on nights and weekends because it's just inherently enjoyable. But
Right.
in a corporate context, in a startup context, there's a reason, there's an idea, there's a why behind all of this. And I think if you do a good job of understanding it, if you do a good job of sharing that with others, and then sort of using it to inform your decision points and kind of the paths you pick each and every day, I think you wind up writing better code and designing better systems. I think it's more personally rewarding because you're not just thinking about how cool this piece of software is. You still get that little kick, but you also get the boost from the impact it has on somebody else in the world. And then to your point, Rick, of kind of having those career conversations, having those performance conversations, you're already now thinking in multiple dimensions. You're thinking about the business implications, the business impact, the value you're creating, and you're thinking about the code. You're thinking about the quality. You're thinking about the say-do rate. You're thinking about all the sort of mechanics of getting great code into production, great high quality code into production. But now you're speaking kind of multiple languages, still about the same piece of work, still about the same piece of mastery. But I think it results in better work. I think it results in a more internal, inherent feeling of reward, and I think it helps you in terms of that perception and kind of bridging your own world experience with those around you.
Got it. I appreciate that, pearl of wisdom in terms of identifying mastery, right? And from what I've learned from speaking with you, it really is about the time that you invest to go deep, right? And become that second level like thinker, right? And also just putting in the time and the effort. So I really appreciate your advice, Randy. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, I had a great time. It was a lot
Thank
of
you very
fun.
much.
Appreciate the
Thank
opportunity.
you.